Hey everyone, my name is Erin Hermansky and I'm the coordinator of Youth and Young Adult Ministry here at Prince of Peace Catholic Community in Plano, Texas. And we are excited to welcome you to our last Profess of the season. And we're here with Father Ben O'Loughlin. Father Ben, tell us just a little bit about yourself. Father Ben's a Legionnaire, and what's your background? How'd you come here? Give our audience a little bit to know about you before we get into the topic.
Thanks, Erin. So I'm originally from upstate New York. I joined Legionaries of Christ out of high school, got sent to Germany to do my novitiate, spent 2 years in Germany, 4 years in Spain, 7 years in Italy, was doing youth work in Florence, got ordained a deacon, and then I got sent out once I was a deacon to Detroit. So I went from Florentine Renaissance artwork to 8 Mile, which has its beauties. Shout out to anybody from 8 Mile, from the D there, here from Big D. That was a powerful experience. Did a lot of missions. After that, went down to Mexico City for a year, did campus ministry there at one of the Legionaries of Christ universities, the Anáhuac University. And last June, I was sent back here, and I chaplained all of Regnum Christi's young adult ministry in the Dallas area. So that's a lot of spiritual directions. That's a lot of retreats, and just accompanying, supporting any of the initiatives, the outreach, the apostolate that the young adults I work with have.
That's awesome. And Father Ben is also one of our confessors here that comes every month for Exalt. So many of you probably have seen him as one of the priests for our confession lines at Exalt. And yeah, we're super excited that you're here. And I'm excited to hear about our topic, which is the fulfillment of all desire, the 3 stages of the Christian perfection. And I think this is a super important topic right now because I feel like our prayer lives are kind of like roller coasters. Some people I feel like are doing really, really well in quarantine. And I think other people are kind of lost and maybe could really benefit from this type of talk. So I'm really excited to hear from you. And I just want to let all of our viewers know that at the very end of our talk tonight, there will be a time for Q&A. So if you have any Q&A, I would like to direct everyone, if you're at a Facebook watch party or watching on Facebook, to go to our YouTube channel, and that's where we'll be streaming all of our questions live. So anytime during the talk, if you have a question about something that Father Ben said, please type it in the YouTube chat, and we will ask all of those questions, and they will be anonymous. So we'll ask him all those questions at the end, and we'll try to hit everyone. We had a lot of great Q&A last month with Father Edwin. So we're really looking forward to your interaction with us, even from a virtual experience. So Father, would you like to open us in prayer, and then I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Lord Jesus, we ask you to send down your Holy Spirit, the sanctifier, into all these different places from which we are gathered here in your name. Grant us your light, grant us your wisdom, grant me your divine gift of gab to explain well the little bit of the mysteries that I've experienced of your love in prayer. And may this meeting, even as virtual, be a beautiful moment for all of us to get to know you better, to get to recognize your voice a little more, to see how and where and when you like to speak into our lives. I ask you all these things in your name. Amen.
Amen.
In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
All right, I'll be back for the Q&A, and we'll hand it over to Father Ben.
Thanks, Erin. So the title that Profess gave to this talk is the fulfillment of all desire. Part of my experience being a spiritual director, also being a confessor, is what happens when things break down. Now, obviously, that's not my favorite part of the job. That's not even the biggest part of my job, because one of the great things that I get to do as a spiritual director is see what God does in people's lives as I direct them spiritually, to see God's power, to see God's grace, to see what God is doing, to see God's voice. But occasionally things do break down. And that's going to be the perspective of this talk. I would subtitle the fulfillment of all desire, what to do when your prayer doesn't work. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to map out the prayer life, typically the stages and steps that your journey towards the fulfillment of all desire in God typically will follow. And then I'm going to break down each stage of that spiritual journey into, probably dating myself, but a ways back there were these memes, what I think I do, what my mom thinks I do, what my teachers think I do, what I actually do. There was this one about seminarians, what I think I do, Superman, what my mom thinks I do, Jedi Master. And it went all the way down until it was finally what I actually do is this guy asleep trying to study theology in this pile of books, which is a big chunk of what you do when you're studying. So I want to do that for each stage of the spiritual life. Us climbing that mountain to Christ, who can fulfill every desire and who says that he can fulfill every desire. Now, before we dive into this, I think there's an important distinction we have to make, because our prayer life is not the same as our spiritual life. And a lot of times we identify those things. It's if I go walk into church, spiritual life on. Walk out of church, spiritual life off. And the problem with that is that we're spiritual. There's a Jesuit father, Marco Rupnik. He said that his understanding of spiritual is actually that capacity that God gives us by creating us as spiritual beings to enter into relationship with him and also with other people. So spiritual is everywhere I go, everything I do. And that means that that relationship with God is going on everywhere, with every one of my thoughts, with every one of my actions, with every event of my life, every victory and every mishap. What I'm going to talk about today is much more prayer life, those moments of intense and intentional relationship with God where I am dedicating time to him and dedicating time to us. That's affected, and we'll look at that a little bit, how that's affected by what's going on in my broader spiritual life. But if you want to think about it a certain way, you could say that spiritual life is like the city that's surrounding me. I'm walking through this spiritual life. Every once in a while, I'm going to stop. I'm going to take a breather. Me and God are going to grab a park bench or go into a Starbucks and dedicate some quality time to us. So what I want to explain at this Profess is that quality time for us. And that quality time for us is God drives that. A lot of times we think of prayer as something that I do. It's actually something that God does. God's the engine of that, both our spiritual life, how we're growing and developing spiritually. He's the engine of that relationship with him. But he's also the engine of our prayer, the time that I dedicate to him. He as an engine can't break down, but we can break down. And to understand how not to do that, how not to get, lost along the way, how not to get off the road, it's important to understand the stages of the journey. So I would divide the prayer life into two big phases, which actually semi-culminate here on earth in the fulfillment of all desire that actually becomes an unstoppable, unbreakable, forever type of reality when we die, hopefully, and go to heaven, where there's no way back and there's no way for that relationship to break down, like it can through sin or through our mistakes. So the first half of the spiritual journey, it's active. I am the protagonist, sort of. God is the protagonist, but I am actually active. I have to do a lot of things to allow God to work. And that's an initial stage of conversion. That's a second stage of living in grace and being just one of the people that God can count on to be his friends. And then there's this last stage of I'm doing everything I can to be God's perfect friend. At a certain point, you max out because you've done a lot of the things that you can do by yourself, and there are now things that only God can do. That's where you go into a second phase of the spiritual life, in your prayer life, which is more, from your end, more passive. God's the protagonist because he's doing the things now that you can't do by yourself. And that'll be, and we'll explain what these are: prayer of passive recollection, prayer of quiet, prayer of union. The dark night of the soul, and finally total union with God. So we're going to jump in with active phase 1. I am the protagonist, sort of. And there's a gospel passage, scripture passage from Isaiah 40, verses 3 to 4. And that's a voice proclaims, "In the wilderness prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the wasteland a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, every mountain and hill made low. The rugged land shall be a plain, the rough country a broad valley." So in this first stage, you are trying to make ready the path for God, to smooth things out so there aren't obstacles between you and God. If you want to think of it this way, these 3 stages are like if you're looking at the topography of your soul and you have the Himalaya mountains running across between you and God, and you have like this little goat trail. You can't handle one goat going one direction, and that's all it can handle. The problem is on top of the Himalaya mountain chain, there's the Great Wall of China, and that's sin, and nothing gets through that. The first stage of the spiritual journey is to knock that down with God's help, so that you can actually resume communication between you and the God who made you. The next stage is you want to make that trail wider. So you can get 2 goats. One goat goes and the other goat comes. It goes nuts. Like you send a message to God, goes all the way up to the top of the mountains, all the way down. The God sends a message to you, it goes all the way up and all the way back down. There's not enough space for traffic. What you want to get to is at the end of this active phase where you're actively working on the topography of your soul, working in virtue, working on opening things up to God, is that you have a mega highway, 8 lanes, running straight through that mountain range. If there's a valley, there's a bridge. If there's a mountain, there's a tunnel between you and God. And that's when you've set everything up for that second stage where God can start acting, because you've opened up your soul and your life to Him. So step 1 of that active phase is conversion. Hosea chapter 2, verse 8, "I will hedge her way in with thorns and erect a wall against her so that she cannot find her paths." This first phase is when you realize that something is wrong with your life. You have that big, you're like running into that wall of China. And if you run into a brick wall enough times, the brick wall doesn't move. You just bruised and battered and bloody, and you can't get through that. You can only break your nose so many times before you need help. So in this phase, a lot of times what's happening is that I've got my life set up. I know how my life is going. I'm just flowing with how I've set up my life. And there's going to be sin there. And my life does not flow the way God envisioned it flowing. So the thing that God is going to do is God is going to cause disruption. He's going to break into your life, and He's going to make it a very, very rough ride, because it's not good for you to be going the direction you're going. Here, sort of open up, a lot of people think of peace as the criteria for if something's good or not, if I should do something or not. Peace is actually a psychological state in which everything in my life is going the same direction. And that's not always good. I'll give you an example. Serial killer. Likes hurting people. He's really good at killing people. And he kills people. Everything in his life is lined up. It's all going in the same direction. There is peace. There's not perfect peace because he can't completely take out his conscience, unless there's just psychologically something so wrong with him. But if God is going to change this man's life, God needs to remove that peace. And He needs this guy's life to fall apart. God is going to throw obstacles in there. God is going to start dumping massive boulders in that river until there are rapids, and rapids big enough for his raft to just lose it, rip. He ends up sitting there on the side of that river, wondering what happened to his life. So God is going to disrupt your life because there's sin in your life. And that sin is taking you in a direction that God doesn't want you to go. He didn't create you to go down that path. What does the devil do? Peace on. The devil wants you to keep doing what you're doing. He's going to smooth the way. He's going to, affirm you when you have those pesky doubts that maybe all these things that I'm doing are actually bad and hurting me and I should stop. And they don't make me happy enough. He's going to try to distract you from that. He wants to make things easy. What do you experience? You experience turbulence. God is messing with your life because your life can be so much better. It can go a much better direction. He wants you to turn around. What do? Naturally, you search for peace. And a lot of times that's trying to run away from what God is doing to get things back to the way they were. I'm trying to get those doubts out of my life. I'm trying to, plow on. At this point, though, there's only one way to find peace. And it's to stop, take stock of that sin in your life, and begin the path of conversion, where I turn around. And that's embracing that turbulence, embracing what God is doing, and daring to change. And that's what you should do. You should embrace that change. Embrace the turbulence, what it's causing. Turn around and start swimming upstream, which is not fun, but it's fulfilling and it's life-changing. Second phase of this active spiritual journey on your part, you start getting good at swimming upstream. There's this, you're still going against the current. But what God is doing, God is saying, no, keep going. You're like, I just want to float for a little while. And God says, no, you can't float for a little while. Can I please float? No, you can't float for a little while. It's like if you've seen the movie The Shack, towards the end, when the Native American chieftain appears as God. He's there, and the protagonist realizes that God wants him to forgive the man who murdered his daughter. And he's sitting there, he has the ladybug there, and he's about to crush it because the ladybug was the calling card of this serial killer. And that's what he found when his daughter was gone. And he wants to crush it, and he's sitting there, and it's like, you want me to forgive him? And he's like accusing God. He's hurt that God would even suggest that. And God just sits there and says, yep. Like, there's no mercy there. It's just pure tough love. You are doing this, and I am not compromising with you not being transformed, with you not converting. God is going to be uncompromising. God is going to push back when you want to just drift and go back to the way things were. What is the devil going to do? He's going to tell you how easy it was before. Life was easy before you started swimming upstream. Like, before you tried to be patient, life was so much easier. I mean, not for all the other people in your life, but for you, it was just so much easier. Before you tried living virtue, so much easier. Before, on a human level, before you started working out, life was so much easier when you weren't trying to lift pounds and pounds of metal every day. And those dumbbells. Why don't you just go back to the way things were? What you experience is that struggle. And that struggle is hard. That struggle it's pain. But it's alternately rewarding and very frustrating. As you struggle, as you have victories, as you have failures, as you go back and forth. What you experience is flip-flopping. I'm in and I'm doing this. I'm trying to change and convert, and then I spend 3 days just drifting back down the stream, and then I have to swim back up that again. What do you need to do? You need to persevere. At this point, it's important to remember, I'm saying a lot of these things that you're doing aren't all things that are happening when you kneel down to pray. But the reason they're so important for those key moments of prayer is because these are the obstacles that God's speaking to you in your life. These are the things that are getting in the way of Him transforming you in your prayer. These are the things that aren't allowing you and God to be an us, to be a team. So how deep your prayer is, how joyful your prayer is, how much you experience God is very proportional to how hard you're trying to change and how committed you are to these struggles, to root up vices, bad habits, sin out of your life, and to start planting virtue in its place. The last stage of this active phase, God starts rewarding you. Matthew 13, verse 44. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field, which a person finds and hides again, and out of joy goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. This stage, you're still working, but the dynamic of your life, you're starting to find that peace again. It's changed. Now, your life, because of all this work, is starting to flow in the right direction, to flow towards holiness, to flow towards that relationship with God. God rewards that. And a lot of times you'll get a lot of joy, a lot of experiences of him in your prayer at this moment of your life. The devil now is the one who's trying to disrupt. If before God was the one putting roadblocks up because the highway you were driving down or speeding down possibly ended up going off a cliff, now the devil is the one who's putting those roadblocks up. He's the one trying to throw a wrench into the works of your life, to make things hard, because now you're going the right direction. He wants you to go the wrong direction. You experience, a lot of times in the time you're dedicating to prayer, you experience a lot of consolation, which is that joy, that peace, that serenity, that feeling of rightness, that I belong here, that God wants me to be here, and God is here, and we're both here. Because God allows you to feel what is actually happening in your soul, that aligning of you with God's plan for your life, with God's dream for your life. What do you need to do? Not just celebrate, because that's the tendency. Here you're like, hey, I am holy. We're done. This is good. This is awesome. I'm going to go change the world now. Thank you, God, for making me a saint. Yeah. Let's go have a party. God is happy for you. That's right. He's happy that you're on the right track, but he needs you to be grateful more than just to celebrate this. Because yes, you've done a lot, but gratitude is something that helps you be humble at this point. Gratitude means, God, thank you for doing this in my life. Thank you for helping me. Thank you for showing me these things. Thank you for accompanying me and giving me the strength to change vices into virtue in my life. That thankfulness is humility because it recognizes, A, that I needed help. Where I was back at this, back in the day is not where I am now. And that might be a month ago, that might be years ago, that might whenever you reach this point where basically you have good habits and virtues that allow you to walk towards God joyfully. You're good at being virtuous. You're not perfectly good at being virtuous because we're all human. But there's a sense of everything in your life falling into place. And that gratitude recognizes that God gave you that help, that you needed that help, and allows you to rejoice that God has helped you to enter in this newfound relationship with him. At this point, you have virtues. They work. You're good at being good. You enjoy being good. That doesn't mean it's not hard to be good, but you start to relish that. The reason that's happening is that you are or have achieved as much as, with God's help, but as much as you can. I've acquired virtue. I've put in the work. I've put in the effort. I've put in sweat, blood, tears, and we've got it done, and I'm feeling stronger than ever because I built up all of those spiritual muscles. But these are things that I can do. I can work on being more patient. I can dedicate time to prayer. I'm capable of doing those things. The problem is that God isn't going to settle for what you're capable of doing. And thanks be to God that he's not going to settle for what you or me or anyone else is capable of doing on our own, because that would be a very sad level of happiness. And that's why stuff hits the fan. So the end of this phase of prayer is called the dark night of the senses. Basically, it's when God takes something away. You see, I have 5 senses. You have 5 senses. Those 5 senses do not allow us to perceive God. We can't smell him. We can't touch him. We can't see him. We can't hear him. We can't taste him. So when we feel God, when we have that joy, when we have that consolation in our lives in prayer, it's a gift, it's a miracle. He is saying, good and faithful service, good and faithful servant, thanks for your service. I appreciate that. I want to give you the miracle of feeling what is happening right now spiritually in your soul. But that's a miracle. That miracle is, God is able to give it to us because we've removed obstacles in our everyday life. We fought against sin. We are generally, habitually in his presence. If somebody asks him, hey, is so-and-so your friend? He can say yes. And we've dedicated quality time to prayer with him that allows him to get into our lives and transform it. But the problem is he needs to do things that we can't do. And he needs us to now not get in the way of doing things. It's like if you're going to do open heart surgery on someone, you want to give them general anesthesia. Because you don't want them flailing around or trying to get a look at what you're doing, Like you really don't need them watching you going in there and opening their heart up, and especially with the saw and the ribs and those things. So they put you under. At this point, God is going to not put you completely under. It's not like we have, you walk into a church and there's like a bunch of comatose people over there. Oh, they're in the dark night of the senses. They'll probably be out in a few months, No, you're still going about your day. You're still praying, but God removes a miracle. And you don't feel him anymore. It's like, there's a fridge and it's chained up. I was actually doing Holy Week missions in Chicago with college students. We're doing street missions, and we walked into this parish hall, and there was a fridge, and it was chained shut with a padlock. Like, man, these people take fasting seriously. That's what this feels like. All of a sudden, nothing happens when I go to pray. What does the devil do when this happens? The devil jumps in and begins to attack. See, it was all fake. It was all in your head. Look at how hard it is now. The devil brings back all the temptations he has, and he goes for you because you're in transition. You're trying to pivot. You're not sure what's going on. You experience something called aridity. I don't feel anything. I go into prayer. I kneel down. I'm like, hey, God. It's like, God, 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 God. It just echoes out there, Or it's like you're sitting by a well and you're throwing pebbles in and they never hit the bottom. It's like there's nothing there. What are you tempted to do? You're tempted to do 2 things. First, give up. And that's what the devil's trying to get you to do. You know what? Actually, this ended. It was good. I had a good experience. I'm going to go back to my life now because this obviously doesn't work. The other good bad option or better bad option is I'm going to white knuckle this. In my prayer, a lot of times prayer in these 3 stages is I'm dedicating time to God. I'm learning about God. I'm digging through the gospel. I'm imagining the scene. And it's like I'm sifting sand. I'm like pulling out gold nuggets. Like grab a bucket of sand, gold nugget. Wow, it's a gold nugget. It's awesome. It's like so cool. I can like wipe it off. And then I go and I find another gold nugget. I find another gold nugget. And now you go to prayer, and it's not that there isn't anything going on in prayer. God is doing a lot in prayer, but he's not giving you gold nuggets anymore. He is directly doing things in your heart, in your mind, in your soul. And your temptation is, no, God, I can do this. And you just buckets of sand, and all you're doing is like prepping a great mix for cement for the next guy who's coming along, but there's nothing there. But you keep trying, and you keep trying harder, and you keep trying harder, and nothing happens, and that gets very, very frustrating. But your tendency is, no, I can do this. And the whole point is that what God wants to do now in your soul, you can't do. Only he can do. And he needs you to let him do that. So you follow him. You go into prayer, you sit down, you say, hey, God, I'm here. What I was doing before doesn't seem to work. Before I would go to the gospel, I'd ponder you, I'd remember your action in my life, and I would be able to think about it, and then my heart would go on fire, and I could ponder you and thank you for being you and marvel at you and share with you. And now I go to prayer and I sit down and nothing happens. And I punch in, and half an hour later, I punch out. You need to persevere and let God do God. Let him do the things in your heart that you can't do. And that's why he's saying, hey, I need you to chill. Don't move. This is very delicate. I've got to do this, okay? It's also a trial because this really hits that pride. The pride that, hey, I know how to do this. I'm good at this. I can do this. I know how to pray. Here we go. You want to see happy, joyful prayer? Boom. And it doesn't work anymore. God's reminding you, hey, that gratitude you were giving me, back when you felt the miracle of my presence, I want you to keep giving me that gratitude because I'm still working. It's just very clear now that I'm working and you're not. So that's a transition. It's a transition where God starts shutting things down because he wants to do things in your prayer. He wants to take the reins of your prayer life, take the steering wheel, and he wants to drive. Then we get into this second phase, the passive phase. If the first, traditionally in spiritual theology, is the purgative way, I'm working to get things out of my system that are blocking my relationship with God. This is called the illuminative way, God shining into my life. Not that I can always see it, because it's a miracle when we see that, because we don't have eyes to see it. But God is shining God into my life. God is working on his own in my life, and I need to let him work. Bible passage that explains this, little Hosea, chapter 2, verse 16. Therefore I will allure her now. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak persuasively to her. God takes us into a desert where there is nothing but him. And that nothing is hard to work with. My imagination's like, we're going to go pray, and there's nothing there. And my imagination is looking for something to do, and it gets bored. So it starts pulling out stuff from before. Hey, remember that YouTube video we watched? Hey, why don't you think about that? And you need to take your imagination, tell your imagination, give it your imagination its toys, give it some Legos, and let it plan to play. And you spend time with God, and be okay with just being there with him and letting him do his work. This is following God in prayer and responding to God in everyday life. A lot of times, if you go into prayer, if you go in half an hour later, you come back out. While you were praying, you're like, I know I'm praying. I'm focusing out. Afterwards, you're like, what did I do? I don't know what I did. If you're praying well, you're going to see that in your life, in the good that you do, in the virtues that you still have, in the way you touch other people's lives. So, prayer of passive recollection. At this point, this is the first of the three stages of this passive illuminative phase of your prayer life. This is where you really, 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 really need a spiritual director. Really, I'd say you need a spiritual director from the very beginning, because if you're going to start dedicating quality time to prayer, which you need to do to start this whole process, 20, 30 minutes of prayer a day, you need a spiritual director to guide you through that, because the spiritual director is the one who has that relationship with God, recognizes God's voice, and can guide you through this and help you distinguish between God's voice and the other voices from you, from the devil, from other people, from other distractions in your life. Here it's really important because you're experiencing God in ways that aren't human. God is being much more God. And he's not just helping you to do the things that you can do. So, prayer of passive recollection. I go to prayer. I sit down. Nothing works. Okay, I used to be able to imagine the gospel. No, that doesn't work anymore. So we've got some dark night of the senses going on. And the distractions work. They're there, but they're not prayer. Sometimes you're not sure if a distraction is prayer or not. I remember once I was in prayer, and I was in this moment of God wanted things to be more silent. And that had been going on for a while, and then I had this really cool theological insight. I don't remember what it was right now, but it was really cool in the moment. It just grabbed my eye. It's really cool. Let's follow that. But I said, let's follow it for like 3 minutes and then see where it takes me. 3 minutes later, I was reliving my high school days shooting aliens on the first version of Halo. Okay? So that was a sign that was a distraction. So you stop, you go back. Okay, God, I guess you really do want me to just sort of be here. So this passive recollection, I am rejecting temptations. I'm rejecting distractions. I'm letting God be with me. But that takes effort on my part. I'm the one who's constantly clearing over and over again those distractions on my life to let God just be with me and let God do whatever he's doing so I don't let those distractions get in the way of that. The devil, what does the devil want you to do here? The devil wants you to take back control because just sitting here not being distracted and loving God, but it's like God, like, I feel nothing. I hear nothing. I love you. I've decided that I love you right now. And your distraction. I love you. That's hard. And the devil wants to take back control. It was like, hey, remember when you ran your prayer and it was so awesome? You need to go back there. You experience a new type of peace. It's not the bubbly joy. This is awesome. That's such a cool gold nugget peace. But there's an experience of peace of being with God. And that's why the distractions are in some sense easy to spot because they muddy the waters and they stir things up and they're exciting, but they get in the way. And God gives us yearning for that quiet. What do? Hopefully you marvel at that peace, but you shouldn't just marvel at it. Oh, wow, this is cool. You need to accept it. And you're going to start giving these glimmers of like, I was just praying and it was really nice. What did you do? Nothing. You start to get these glimmers of just sort of being with God. Like when you're sitting with a person you love and you don't have to do anything. You're just there and it's just great to be together. You need to thank God for that again. Don't presume, oh yeah, that's the beginnings of, here we go. We got the real holiness. I thought it was real holiness before, when I was thinking, now we're really holy. This is it. I'm there. Don't presume, thank him for it. Thank him for those gifts. Step 2. So God has shut things down. And if before it was like, I'm there with God and God is showing me things. Now it's like, God is just showing me things. It's sort of the experience of like general anesthesia. I'm just here. And now I'm not working to reject the distractions. So once I get into prayer, I just spend time with God. And it's over. Did I do anything? The temptation afterwards, like maybe I wasn't praying, maybe I was asleep. No, I wasn't asleep. I was just like with God and it was just awesome. You start to want those times where I go and I'm there with God and we're there. The devil, once again, wants you to grasp for control. We love being in control. We want control. Control is safe. Control is not worrisome. I don't have to wonder what happened in my prayer if I'm in control. Because I know what I prayed on. I did this in my prayer. And this type of prayer, this prayer of quiet, God did something. I don't know what it was. It was good. But there is that, I don't know. What you do, once again, these are deeper, powerful experiences. You need to thank him. constantly go back to thank God for that. Don't presume. The last phase of this more passive prayer is what's called prayer of union. And this is what God does. God overwhelms. So he's in the background. He's been working on you. He's been shoring things up. He's been strengthening your life. He's been injecting bedrock into your soul where before there was sand. And he's been preparing you to survive a deeper contact with him. In this what's called prayer of union, he begins to give you that. And what you experience, these moments of just like, your just attention is just grabbed by God. It's like I go to prayer and I'm gone. And this isn't something that happens every single time you go to pray, but there's moments where it's like, I just couldn't. It was like you couldn't get distracted. You would have had to do yourself violence to get distracted by something. Because God was just so much more powerful and God was so much more interesting. It's like God grabs you and shows you things. And he shows you his love and he shows you his heart, and you can't look away from that. What does the devil do? The devil is going to sow doubt. When you have those, at the very, very beginning, sort of glimpses of that, the devil's going to tell you, well, that's you. Remember how quiet things are supposed to be? You've gotten good at letting things be quiet. Now just reject all that. You got to hold on to that deep, dark quiet because God's there. And if God starts shooting rays of sunshine into your life, like letting you feel him again and see him again in a deeper way, the devil's going to be like, oh, you need to get rid of that. That's not where God was. Remember? Stay dark. Embrace the quiet. When really it's God who is now talking to you because you're strong enough to hear his voice in a deeper way. What do you experience? Nothing? Question mark. It's hard to explain. St. Teresa of Avila says, at this point, I'm going to explain some things when she's going through my life. It's her autobiography. It's the story of her prayer life. She's like, I'm going to explain some things. If this has happened to you, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. If it hasn't happened to you, you'll have no clue. Just skip this chapter. Actually, just close the book, because after this, it's sort of like, I can't really explain this. But when you have those moments where you meet God, but you get the sense that it's not you understanding something about God and rejoicing in it, like it was at the beginning of your prayer. This is God showing you something about him that you could have never guessed at. Sometimes when you'll finish your prayer and be like, did I pray? I wasn't doing anything, but I feel transforming. And I experience God in a different way. And that's why a spiritual director at these stages is so important, because you need him to help you understand, hey, did I fall asleep? It's not like I had a really rough week of work. I haven't been sleeping at all. I got to prayer and I just feel so much better. Yeah, because you fell asleep for half an hour. Yeah. Like your spiritual director can help you sort out the doubts and trying to figure out, hey, what is God and what isn't God? What is just quiet, or in these different types of prayer? What is me making space for God still in that quiet? What is God grabbing, taking control of my soul and allowing me to just quietly be with him? And what is God shining rays of revelation of his goodness into my heart? And that's where these are things you want to constantly take to a spiritual director at this point. What should you do? Trust and keep praying. We're closing it up now, so I'm just going to hit very briefly 2 experiences. These experiences do not happen to everyone. There's saints who have never experienced this. Some people experience them in purgatory and then heaven. Some saints have an experience of these things here on earth. So one of these is the dark night of the soul. And what God does here is total trial, total darkness. He wants to completely purify your love for him, not just make it purer, but ensure that, and he does this because he knows you and he knows that you can survive this, to make sure that you are only doing this out of pure love for him, pure commitment to him, pure relationship with him, and not because of the graces, the gifts he's given you. That at this point, you can't survive that it's just, I'm proud and I can do this, because you can't. So it's total trial and darkness. The devil wants to sow despair, say, it was all a lie. Now you can't feel God at all. All of these graces are gone. You can barely remember him. You experience darkness. What you're doing, you're suffering. That's why it's like purgatory on earth. Some saints like Mother Teresa have experienced this. Years of just total darkness interiorly. And what you do, you limp on and you go back to whatever basic type of prayer you can, and you trust the Lord. And this is purifying. That's followed by another passive phase, which saints will call mystical marriage. What is God gives, where before it was total trial, it's now total gift. The devil here doesn't have a lot to do because God is so present. So he bides his time. You experience deep intimacy with God. You rest in him. This doesn't mean that you're in heaven already on earth. You still have to work through things. There's still problems, but you have God's presence there. It's like something guaranteed in your life and soul. And you try to be worthy of this in everyday life. So finally, takeaways. This has been a really quick run through the different phases of the spiritual life. I would say if you want to start this journey, or if you are already on this journey, but you want to make sure you're walking it, you need to dedicate time to daily prayer. Daily mental prayer is that time dedicated just to you and God. Not time to examine your conscience, to figure out your life, to puzzle out problems, but time for you and God to be together. Whether that's meditation, I'm sort of chewing the cud and pondering and taking things apart and putting them back together and discovering those gold nuggets of truths about God on my own. Or whether that's more contemplative prayer, which is active, that active recollection where I am pondering and I'm loving and I'm clearing the board. And then that passive recollection where God is creating a quiet in my life. Or further into the passive prayer, that prayer of quiet, or that prayer of union. So dedicate time to prayer. Find a spiritual director. And it's important, it's not pride to try to figure out where you are on this journey. Because where you are gives you the key to understanding, what is God trying to do right now? How is he speaking to me? What should I be doing? How is the devil trying to stop me? And what should I be striving towards in my life, in this journey with God? So now we'll open it up for questions. I know we threw a lot out at you, and I think Erin has some of it.
I do. So I just want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, we'll be on here for probably another 10, 15 minutes. Please feel free to ask all the questions on our YouTube channel, and we have someone that will be sending them to me, so I'll be able to ask them. So first question is, I think this is a good question. It's about spiritual direction. And I think a lot of people, especially young adults or just people who are starting to get more into their faith, don't understand how to get a spiritual director and what to do like in quarantine right now when spiritual direction isn't available. That's kind of a two-part question.
Okay. First part, because hopefully quarantine won't be forever. Things to look for in a spiritual director. St. Teresa of Avila says that you should look for two things in a spiritual director. One is holiness, and the other is, for translating into English, know-how. And she says, if you have to pick in a spiritual director between them being holy and them being knowledgeable, pick someone who's knowledgeable, not just someone who's holy. It's like a coach. So if there are amazing basketball players, Hall of Famers, who cannot coach, they cannot teach that, they don't know how to explain that to someone and help you to do the same thing. The spiritual director is the one who should be able to. So try to please, hopefully you will find someone who is both holy, an example, and knowledgeable at the spiritual life. If you have to settle for someone who's knowledgeable, not just someone who is holy. Ways to find them. Priests should be good options. I hope every priest you know is a good option. But not every priest is a great teacher by skill set. And you're also not going to click with every priest who is a good teacher as well. So, because that's also a third aspect, is this person has to understand you. You have to be able to have friendship. They have to get you. There has to be a little bit of chemistry there where you click and they understand you and you can understand them. The final point on that is ideally find someone who you can actually personally meet with. This goes into our quarantine shelter in place problem, where there you get whatever you can. I've been, meeting with some people social distancing. I've been meeting with, other people via everything, Zoom, Skype, Duo, Hangouts, FaceTime. No, I don't have an iPhone, so no FaceTime. But so that's always a great stopgap. For me, it works well. My spiritual director actually lives in New York City, but he was my spiritual director in the same place for 3 years. So we know each other really well. And a spiritual director doesn't have to be a priest. It just has to be someone who has that knowledge of the spiritual life, ideally is also holy, and is a good teacher of that. People who dedicate their lives to the spiritual life, you're talking, conservative people, religious brothers, monks, sisters, should have that lived experience, but there are also lay people who can do that for you.
That's a great answer. I know here at Prince of Peace, we send a lot of our young adults to the Legionnaires, and normally we send them to you, and then you guys kind of discern if it's a good fit, or then you help them find someone else. Is that still kind of an option for maybe not during quarantine?
Yeah. A lot of times what I'll do is when someone asks me for spiritual direction, I'll agree to meet with them once and do what I call spiritual inventory. Hey, where are you at in your path with God? What's your life story? What's your faith journey? What are the sort of the roadblocks you've dealt with in your life? What's your prayer life right now? Normally a one-on-one like that can be helpful, whether or not I'm a good fit as a spiritual director for someone. And it also gives both of us a fairly good idea of, hey, is this other person a good fit as a spiritual director or as someone who I could be a good spiritual director for? And I've also told people, hey, I'm not a great spiritual director for you, but I know this other person who, if they have the time and the availability for it, they could be a much better spiritual director for you than I am. Just because of temperament, because of experiences, or because they're more gifted to help certain types of people.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know a lot of people, another question we had come in was just what's the difference between spiritual direction and counseling? And I think that's I think they're very different, but can you give a briefing of why you might need both or one versus the other?
Sure. Actually, one of the things when I do a spiritual inventory, normally there's sort of 4 possible things that someone can be looking for. First off, just because of your needs, where you are in life, why you came looking for spiritual counsel. So sometimes someone just needs a life coach. Like they need someone to help them through what they're going through. They need a friend, someone with a little bit more experience, or someone who's like you have a young professional in the business world trying to live their faith. So sometimes you just need a mentor or a life coach. Sometimes there are things in your life that can need counseling because they can be more psychological roadblocks, life experiences, something that's stuck there and it's not letting you progress and not letting things do it. It's not sin, but it's something that still needs to be healed, something that still needs to be dealt with in your life. And there's a counselor or a therapist can help remove that roadblock, help you grow past that. It's sort of like you have a tree, you're not giving the sapling space. And when you open it up, then it can grow out and flourish. Sometimes someone is looking more for advice in just their moral life, dealing with sin, virtue, and vice. And it's more that struggle for day-to-day holiness than someone who's already embarked or is willing to embark or has the time to embark on that spiritual prayer journey. And in that case, you may just need a confessor, a priest who you regularly go to, someone who knows you, someone who can give you better, deeper counsel and advice and confession, but someone who's above all helping you there. Finally, what I found is someone who's dedicated and committed to starting that prayer journey, putting that time into that quality mental prayer with God. That's when you absolutely need a spiritual director. Oftentimes, the spiritual director, if they're a priest, they can also be your confessor. Some of them can also help you with some counseling things, depending on how capable they are, if they have both degrees, things like that. A lot of times what I'll do, because I don't have that, is I can be a confessor and spiritual director for someone. There's going to be some life coaching thrown in there. And I also know counselors or therapists that sometimes will tag team on with the people I'm directing.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to stick with me. Longer question. Okay, I'm facing the repetitive dark night of the senses right now, and my daily meditation of the daily readings has become dry and disheartening. What more can you recommend for those that are persevering in making these steps that you recommend?
So I'd say, in general, for all of these different stages, above all the stages that are darker or quieter, is remembering. A lot of our relationship with anyone, your relationship, for example, when you get married, you start that relationship, that marriage, with different, you call them memory stones, or different road, signposts along the way, and you would use those experiences. If you're going to describe who your spouse is, or who that person you're in love with is, you would use those experiences. You would tell those stories to help someone understand who they are. Along this whole path, it's very important to constantly be working on that collection of stories about God, about you. This is something that St. Ignatius of Loyola calls the principle and foundation, which is basically that whole, those key experiences of God, the things we've lived together, that sum up who and what you are for God and who and what God is for you. So I would say, especially in those moments of darkness, it's important to always be able to go back and remember, hey, I can't see you right now. I can't experience you right now, but I know who you are. And I know because we went through this together, and we went through that together, and you gave me this gift, and you healed this in my life, and you helped me to achieve this. So I think one of the big things there, aside from working with your spiritual director as you progress through this and persevere, is to constantly go back to the memory of what you saw when the sun was shining brightly, and you could see clearly who and what God was for you and how much He loved you.
All right, next question is, so at the beginning of your talk, I think in stage 1, you talked about that good and bad piece, like comparing it to a serial killer. So how do you discern if you have good or bad peace, especially if you're making a big life decision?
Assuming that you're not a serial killer and the example doesn't apply, right?
Yes, making that assumption.
So peace is when, there's always, you can't ever achieve total peace if something is going wrong, because God is all powerful and God doesn't want you to go the direction you're going. He's going to respect your freedom, but God is perfectly and all powerfully capable of adding that nagging doubt to the peace in your life. I would say that to discern that, it's really important to do daily what St. Ignatius of Loyola calls examine prayer. Examine prayer is when take a breath, stop, ask God to give me light, and I look back through my day and what has happened and how that has affected me. I see the wins in my life of virtue. I see the losses, the missteps. I see my sins. But I also look at how all of that is affecting me. What emotions, how am I reacting to what God is doing, what God's asking for me, other people are asking for me. And you get a sense, it's very hard for you to really look at your life like that and not be aware of the nuances of that peace, where that peace actually is, everything going in the same direction. I'm roaring towards God at full throttle. I don't know if you've seen Ford versus Ferrari. It's like at 7,000 RPMs, everything stops. You know, I was really tempted to try that in my car the day after I watched the movie, but I have a Camry, so not happening. But it's that daily attention to what is stirring in my heart. And I think there you'll begin to really get a sense for all of the currents that there are there. And there will always be movements. There will always be things that it's hard for me to give God. I'm scared to give God, or things that God really wants me to give him. Things that are good or bad in both directions. It's very hard when you're paying attention to it, just like any river. There isn't ever perfect peace there. And seeing where those currents are coming from is the key to sending things towards God and not in the opposite direction.
Awesome. What are some good introductory reads to learn more about the spiritual way?
About the spiritual life.
Like, what's Spiritual Life 101?
So, Spiritual Life 101, more than books, I'm just going to throw some authors at you. Spiritual Life 101, there's Father Jacques Philippe. He has very small, easy to digest.
Non-intimidating.
Non-intimidating because they're not even like full-size books. They're like mini books, okay?
With big font.
Even
so
if you're not a huge font.
Yeah, you feel like, wow, I could finish this book in a day. Yeah.
And he has a great one actually on the peace, inner peace question that we just had. There is another book, this one's written by a confrere of mine. It's called The Better Part, written by Father John Bartunek. And what he does is he gives you an introduction sort of 101 toolbox for prayer, if you want to start this journey. And then he goes through the Gospels, breaking it down into and teaching you how to do those initial types of prayer. And he'll take this Gospel passage, hey, if you want to sift through that for gold nuggets, how about looking at it, Jesus is my friend. Or Jesus is my teacher if you're like more intellectual and you want to go through and you like truths and those, you marvel at those. Or if you're more experiential. That's also a great book to get you started in the spiritual life.
Awesome. I'll just make this our last question is, how do you exactly discern what step to take next in the spiritual life? I think this comes from people being like, I'm just going to pray a rosary because it's good to pray a rosary. How do you discern what God's calling you specifically to do instead of just doing things that are good?
Well, I'd assume we're talking about types of prayer, I would guess.
Yeah,
like
practical.
What to do in my prayer. I would say sort of double response. First off, there's the prayer. There are prayers, vocal prayers, prayers that, I say out loud, like I'll pray the rosary, or prayers I'll pray with other people. And then there's the sacraments, and then there's mental prayer, that quality time that I dedicate to God. And then there's examine prayer, which is that day-to-day figuring out what's going on in my life. It's almost like a sort of a little business meeting with God to see how things are going. I would say always sacraments. Always that examine prayer ready to see, hey, what has happened in my life? What is the thread of what God is trying to do in my life? How have I responded? Always dedicate those 20, 30 minutes of quality time to God. If you're in a relationship, you have a girlfriend, or, you met the man of your dreams, you dedicate a lot more than 20 or 30 minutes a day to that person, okay? And this you can do anywhere, and you don't have to take God out to dinner or to the movies. He's a very inexpensive person to have in a relationship. It's much cheaper than any other person you'll ever be in a relationship with. But give him that time, that quality time, which is just you and him, to ponder him. I would say those are always staples. You can't go wrong doing those things. Then there's the other prayers that they aren't things you would do every day, or there's different devotions, things that can speak to you, like the Divine Mercy Chaplet, the Rosary, different novenas. And I would say those are things once you get a sense for who you're, hey, this helps me. This jives with who I am, enjoy this. And also bring those things to your spiritual director, as well as the different, because your spiritual director is going to know you, get a sense for who you are and what can help. And you're also going to want to go to your spiritual director when in your quality mental prayer time, you're like, I sort of feel like things are changing and I'm not sure if I should be holding on to what I was doing or shifting. A lot of that is that going to God in prayer, getting a sense for his voice as you pray more and more and ponder more and more and have a deeper relationship with him, you get a sense for his voice. But also to help with that is that's why you have a spiritual director there to help you. And basically have that freedom to understand, and I close with this. We talk a lot about FOMO for millennials, the fear of missing out. So I don't do anything because I'm so afraid of missing out on anything. I think in the spiritual life, there's something else, and that can come into play with questions like this, which I call FOMO. And that is the fear of messing up. And I'm so worried that what if, and this is fear-based, which is it's a sign that it's not something that's from God. I'm like, shoot, what if I don't pray the rosary every day? Like today I don't, because I have the flu and I just need to sleep. But what if this rosary is going to be the rosary, the one that made it all happen? And I'm like, okay, that's FOMO. You're afraid of missing out. You have this fear of missing out, and in the end, that's a mistrust of God. God, if you're looking for him, if you want to connect with him, if you want to spend time with him, he's not going to betray that. He'll help you do it ever more deeply, but he's always going to meet you halfway. And if he really has an issue, like he doesn't want you to pray 30 rosaries a day, or he wants you to pray a rosary a day, he's very capable of helping you figure that out, because we were talking about the all-powerful God who cares about you and he wants this relationship. So anything that fear-based, like what if I do too little? Take it to prayer, take it to your spiritual director, but also recognize that FOMO is not from God. Trust is from God, and he won't let you down.
That was a great thing to end with. Well, I just want to thank Father Ben for coming out, for making time, for driving all the way to Plano to be with us for Profess. This is our last Profess of the season, which is super exciting. We actually went the whole season, even with COVID-19, on track with all of our speakers. So thanks again for making this happen.
Oh, thanks for being here.
Oh, absolutely. We'll definitely have you back. And I encourage anyone who came in during the talk, this is like a great podcast re-listen. There's so much information that you gave us. I feel like I can listen to that a few times and maybe get something new out of it every time. So your talk will be on our YouTube channel under Profess. You can watch Father Ben's talk and also Father Edwin's talk from last month. And our next live stream event that is pretty exciting is we will be live streaming Exalt Undivided with Michael Gormley as scheduled on May 19th. So head back to our YouTube channel. We'll also direct link it from our Facebook for the live of that. Again, that's May 19th at 7 p.m. And as we're just going to end, would you mind blessing all of us?
Sure. Be happy. The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. The blessing of God Almighty, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, come down upon all of you, remain with you forever, and accompany you in your journey towards him in prayer and in your everyday life. We ask this in his name. Amen.
Amen. And we see all of your faces, and we hope to see you guys again real soon. Thanks for joining us. Have a good one.